All right, folks, a number of garages operate on the side of the streets in both corporate and residential areas and cause issues for the government and residents. What we've learned is that they're in fact illegal. Why? Well, this morning, to look further into this is social media commentator Mr. Dennis Brooks. Morning, sir. Welcome to Smile.
Morning, never morning, Simone, and morning to your viewers.
Yeah, man. Is it illegal because the person who runs it is not certified, for want of a better word, or is it illegal because them just set up shop on them in the middle of the street?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. It's a zoning issue, and I feel very strongly about the zoning issue. In terms of how we manage our public spaces. But I mean, in terms of the legality of it, there are legislations. There's a Town and Communities Act that people need to conform to. Mm-hmm. There's a Companies Act. So if you're setting up a business to do this sort of a thing, to offer this particular service, you should properly register it with the Companies Act so that if you deliver services, especially of this technical nature, that you are really able to be held accountable to your customers who you are taking in. From a Town and Communities Act, I think people have to appreciate that we have to respect the spaces within which we live. Mm-hmm. And there are people who live in residential spaces that were never designed for this purpose and that are not being managed for that particular purpose. And the laws exist to protect them from that kind of a thing.
Okay. Dennis, I feel like this has been a thing for as long as I've known myself. Yeah. Is this an enforcement issue?
I think it is partly an enforcement issue, and it is partly, all right, in my opinion, again, there is a certain level of enforcement that must take place in terms of how we manage our cities and or our towns, and some may be more strict than others, but this whole conversation arises out of enforcement, mm-hmm. A video emerging where enforcement is on display. So I'm not even going to chide.
But is that the anomaly or is that the rule?
I think given the scale of what we sometimes see across various urban centers, I think that it is not necessarily enough the rule. It is sometimes the outlier. Mm-hmm. And so, but one must ask, where do we start? Because bear in mind that, let's take garages that are set up in an ad hoc manner. They're potentially dangerous, because they generate industrial waste. They generate, they impact the soil in the area because they dispose of waste material sometimes inappropriately. That has health implications for the people who live in the area. If you look at noise pollution, just the noise of a garage, and sometimes it goes on into the night. You have to be mindful of the people who live in the communities nearby. Do they want that kind of an activity? Public health risks and safety concerns for children. You're just walking along the street. Sometimes the parts are strewn in the road because they're overlapping and they're interspersing in the spaces in which people are meant to live. And so all of these things then affect their property value. Somebody has to enforce these things because the people who are there very often feel like they're being held hostage because of the fact that if they make a call, then you're hearing that they're an informer and they're this and they're that. So it requires strong enforcement. And I think that we need to open our eyes and not support the people who are saying, oh, this is wickedness and man just a try live and that kind of thing.
But sir, Dennis, you have opened up so many cans of worms with these, in your word, illegal garages. But what if I am a certified mechanic? I have my papers, I can prove that I know what I'm doing, I can fix SIM car, and I set up something in my house. Now, the zoning thing to me is the most important thing you have said, because I think we need laws to say you cannot set up a garage right there, period. Isn't that where you start?
I do believe so, and that's why I go back to the Town and Communities Act. I'm not an expert in the Town and Communities Act, but what I would say is that there is room within that framework for us to have the guidelines and the regulations to tell us these things. It is a zoning issue, and we have to appreciate that there are certain spaces in our towns that should be made for particular things, and other spaces, no, you don't do that. And so, I mean, if
But
you
I
go,
don't think it's an issue of ignorance.
no, it's not.
I don't think it's
not.
that people don't
And
know
so
that
people-
it's a zoning issue.
Exactly.
Nev. People just say, I'm going to put my garage at my gate. Full stop, brag it up, and that's it.
And now business is good, and so you, instead of having one car,
Six.
you have six, and before you know it, you have a garage next door to me. But there are certain communities where that will never happen.
You best believe.
Because certain communities manage their spaces
You will
better.
never
You
live.
will never see that
Yes.
in certain
But,
communities.
well, Sim already said it. Because if I'm in charge of the city, for want of a better phrase, then it's not my fault. If I allow all these things all about the place, then it's my fault.
Which leads me to the next question. Under whose remit does this fall?
Right.
Well, I think this falls at the subnational level of governance.
Well, let's use Kingston and St. Andrew. So that would be the KSMAC.
it is
KSMC.
essentially a KSAMC issue, which is why I support the enforcement that I saw in that TikTok video. It needs to happen. These are things that we have to accept. And then when you look in the comment section, because the comment section is where it all goes down. In the comment section, people need to let people who are posting this kind of a thing know, no, we agree with the enforcement.
Yeah, because a lot of those comments were, boy, and it can't make people eat a food, and it's the government fault, or the government must make spaces for people to have them business, and a whole raft of, commenting as comments.
Yeah, but
Usually.
we also have to balance the needs of communities. Communities have needs. There are residential, there are commercial, there are industrial needs, and we have to realize that. Again, I go back to the point of community members being held hostage because you're satisfying your needs, but what at the expense of mine? So yeah, you have a need to eat a food, but I have a need to sleep. My daughter has a need to study. My cousin has a need, to walk freely on the road.
We spoke about Kingston and St. Andrew, and we know where to go. But what about rural areas? Where do those people go? If they say, well, no, a man set up a garage right in front of my gate and aisle all over the place, where do they go?
Well, there are various municipal corporations, I think, have to discuss this in quite seriousness and decide, well, we have to enforce it at some time, and we have to enforce it somewhere. We have to start now. I mean, people feel like, hey, do something else, enforce something else first. Start now.
As far as you know, and maybe punishment is not the right word here, but is there any punishment for this? If I set up something where I know I shouldn't have set it up in the first place?
Fines and such?
Yeah, is there?
I would have to look into that one to see what the legislation and the regulations are for that. But definitely, I mean, if the people who use the mechanic shops, if the customers begin to hold them accountable, I think that in very many ways we begin to self-regulate.
Not going to happen. I want to ask you outside of that, because if you can go to a man next door you and fix your car for X cheaper than it is to go to another mechanic, you're going to keep patronizing your next door neighbor, which is why the enforcement has to be done at the level that the enforcement has to be done. And the enforcement needs to be enforced. So if there is a fine of $50,000, then there needs to be a fine of $50,000.
But that's key. That's key. What Sim said.
I agree.
Because
then I'm going to stop patronizing.
I agree.
Because you pocket,
even if I go to where I'm supposed to go to, and the man who used to fix my car move and call me and say, boy, Mr. B, I start a little thing in my house, and I rate that man. I will go to that man. So Sim is right. You need, again, to me, the biggest thing here is the zoning issue.
Yeah, it is.
You just need somebody to say, no, you can't.
In truth, we all have our mechanics who we trust. I mean, even tradesmen have their loyal support because you don't want to find a new tradesman to do this particular thing. So if he goes to the ends of the earth, you may go with him. But we have to know that there are limitations.
We have to go. Thanks for coming. And thanks for your service.
Yep.
Sim?
Yes? No joke. Social media commentator Dennis Brooks with us this morning. Coming up, we are discussing the windrush celebrations here in Jamaica. Please stay tuned for that.
Man must say, what kind of service they want to do?